This man's dog called 911 and saved his life.
What's the emergency?
Buddy was more than just a dog. He was a lifeline for his owner Joe, who had epilepsy, a condition that left him vulnerable to sudden and life-threatening seizures. For many years, Buddy had been trained to recognize the signs and respond. But on a cold September night in 2008, Buddy's loyalty would be tested like never before. As Joe collapsed on the floor, his body wrecked by a severe seizure, Buddy did not panic. He leapt into action, racing to the phone that had been specifically designed for this exact moment.
911, what's your emergency?
With years of training, Buddy dialed 911. Dispatchers on the other end of the line were stunned to hear only barking, but they recognized the call. They had been briefed of Buddy's capabilities and immediately dispatched an ambulance to Joe's home. Buddy stayed by Joe's side, licking his face and barking urgently as if he was telling him to hold on. Minutes later, the paramedics arrived, their quick response made possible by a dog's incredible intelligence and loyalty. Joe survived thanks to Buddy's quick thinking. But this wasn't the first time Buddy had saved him. Records show that Buddy had called 911 multiple times before, each time ensuring his owner's safety. Buddy's heroic act made headlines, inspiring countless others to see dogs as more than just pets. For Joe, Buddy wasn't just a dog. He was a savior, a hero, and a best friend.
They discovered his victim's body on live TV, and look at his reaction. He knew he was screwed.
Door jamb that was sitting right by it, so there was no sign that anyone broke in. I mean, the door was locked when everyone got here. I mean, we just don't know where she is.
What about in the parking lot area? I know they've been doing a lot of, I think that's where they have recovered the body or whatever they recovered from there.
Body?
Had you seen anything there? Had you seen anything there? I mean, we don't know if this is the same person. You know what I mean? Like, they took out a body there earlier. We don't know if it's the same person or not. So that's how we're trying to ask people if they know who lived there. Are you okay, sir?
I think I need to sit down.
Okay.
This is Stephen McDaniel, and he was responsible for the murder of Lauren Giddings. At 4 a.m. using a master key, he broke into Giddings' apartment. She was a recent graduate from Mercer Law School. He was wearing a mask and gloves. He then strangled her to death and chopped her body up in the bathroom using a hacksaw. Her torso was thrown into a trash can right outside of the apartment complex. The rest of her remains were thrown into a campus dumpster. Stephen McDaniel was sentenced to life in prison in 2014. The interrogation with the cops are even weirder because he did not move a single muscle on camera during that 3 or 4 hour interrogation. What do you guys think about this case? And a reminder, these videos are for informational and entertainment purposes only.
What do you think happens to us after death?
Just hours after that video was recorded and published by ASMR YouTuber Marie Angel, she would be dead. Marie was an ASMR YouTuber who was on the rise. She was born in Ukraine but was living in Germany at the time of her death. And throughout her career on YouTube, she had cultivated a loving community of supporters on the app. But in September of 2024, something tragic would happen. On that day, Marie would upload a video answering viewers' questions. And one of the questions that one of her viewers asked was, what do you think happens after you die? And you can see her reading that question out loud at the beginning of this video. In the video, she reads the question out loud, but she doesn't really provide her viewers with a clear answer on her thoughts of life after death. Shortly after she recorded the video, she would upload it to her YouTube channel, and just a few hours later, she would be dead. As it turned out, later on that day, Marie was driving through Germany when a drunk driver collided with her vehicle. And unfortunately, she died at the scene, only hours after recording that now eerie video.
This is one of the most gruesome human experiments in history. This is Dr. William Beaumont, and he revolutionized the field of digestion, and he did it with the help of this man. Also, a reminder, I tell a lot of dark stories, so follow along if you want to hear more. So this is Alexis St. Martin. He was a fur trader in the 1800s, and he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. On one of his hunting trips, he took a shotgun blast straight to the abdomen, and the doctor that was called to treat him was Dr. William Beaumont. The shotgun blast ripped a hole the size of a fist into Alexis St. Martin's stomach, and unfortunately his wound didn't heal properly. It turned into a fistula, meaning that there was just a permanent opening in which you could see his innards. At the time, the medical field wasn't sure if food was digested mechanically or chemically. And it's obviously difficult to determine that because you can't see inside yourself. But Dr. William Beaumont is a curious man and an opportunist, and used this situation to his advantage. For the next 10 years, the doctor would spoon-feed food directly into the stomach only to dig it out later. And he agreed because he was poor and received housing and money in exchange. Like he'd dangle meat on a string and then pull it out and observe his findings. And he was able to determine that food is indeed digested chemically. He was able to publish this book, which is still important and is considered the father of gastric physiology to this day.
Do you ever feel violent?
Yes, I do.
What do you feel like doing?
Killing people.
You still feel like killing people?
Yes.
Describe the feeling that you get when you feel like killing people.
Well, last March 11th, I was hallucinating, and I took a razor blade and I cut a man's throat.
Here in the hospital?
Here in the hospital.
Do you think you'd murder me, Joe?
Yes.
That's gruesome, Joe. That's horrible.
Yes, it is.
And you don't blame me if I say I hope you never get out of this place.
I hope I never do either.
The story of Jeff Gehrman proves any assignment can be a matter of life or death, and you should never underestimate your subject. In 2022, the now 69-year-old Jeff Gehrman was at the height of his career, and he told his colleagues he had no plans to retire anytime soon. That would actually all change on Saturday, September 3rd. They walked over to Jeff's house to knock on his door, and when they entered the yard, they actually saw Jeff, only he was lying on the side of his house next to a set of bushes. They walked up, and it was obvious that Jeff was dead. He had been stabbed 7 times, 4 in the neck and 3 in the torso. And with no family of his own, no partners, no roommates, police are wondering what could have happened here. Jeff's neighbors did have something of use. It was a video and it showed a man walking down the street, and then he made a turn toward Jeff's yard. And the suspect actually opened up the gate and let himself in along the side of Jeff's house. You can actually see a sort of struggle in the bushes alongside Jeff's home. You can't really make out what's happening, but based on the state that Jeff was found in, this is clearly the murder. And then after about just 2 minutes, that man dressed in orange emerges from the bushes. He walks down the sidewalk and gets into a maroon SUV that was parked across the street, and then he just drives away. And then Jeff is never seen on footage again. But the assailant does come back to the scene. He's spotted on that footage again, getting out of his car and walking around the side of the house. Obviously, we have our suspect, but who is this person and what is their connection to Jeff? So after speaking with other people in the neighborhood, police learned that a suspect fitting the same description had been seen casing the block over the last few weeks. But here's the thing. Investigators know from their years of experience that the number of stab wounds feels more like a personal attack, perhaps even an act of revenge. But on the other hand, this also doesn't really look like a professional hit job. If it was, the hired man didn't do a very good job of covering up his tracks. And when they speak with Jeff's colleagues at the Las Vegas Review-Journal, they find he never raised any concerns. He was the kind of person who went toe-to-toe with some of Vegas's toughest outlaws for the past 40 years of his life, including members of the mafia. So police have to consider, could there have been someone holding a grudge against Jeff Gehrman? There were probably a lot of people who had a close eye on him, but would any of them be as bold as to murder him? Jeff's colleagues at the Las Vegas Review-Journal thought it was very likely, actually, so they began doing their own investigation. They began tracking down some of his sources. They went through his emails, his computer files, his notes, and they paired the information they had with some of the details that had been released by police. That suspicious maroon SUV that the main suspect was seen getting into. Jeff's colleagues found that that car matched the description of one of the subjects Jeff was reporting on. The journalists themselves decide to go down to this guy's house. And sure enough, he's in the driveway washing a maroon SUV. The owner of that vehicle, another corrupt group of people.
The government.
Was a local politician, Robert Tellis. In May of 2022, Jeff released an article titled "County Office in Turmoil with Secret Videos and Claims of Bullying and Hostility." After the articles were published and Robert lost the election, he began posting angry messages on social media directed towards Jeff. Robert didn't even register to him as a threat, but it turns out there was even more dirt on Robert. Like back in 2020, Robert had been arrested for domestic violence. All to say, it's very obvious that Robert did have a violent temper in him. So by Wednesday, September 7th, police were knocking on Robert's door. They find the straw hat, only it's cut up into pieces and it's stuffed inside a shopping bag. Then they found a pair of shoes. They also saw the same duffel bag the suspect was carrying in the video. So between all of this physical evidence, he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. And that is the story of Jeff Gehrman.
Why did you kill those people?
No comments. No comments. I cannot answer it at this time.
And that's why you killed them?
Right. Right. Not because I was angry with them, not because I hated them, but because I wanted to keep them with me.
Nonetheless, you killed 7 men.
Yes, you did.
And I'm asking you, what got you to kill the 7 men?
And I'm telling you, because the cops let me keep killing them, Nick. Don't you get it?
This man is one of the worst serial killers in U.S. history, and a lot of people don't know about him. This is the story of Dean Corll, also known as the Candyman or the Pied Piper. So Dean Corll was described as a shy, serious kid who was kind of a loner. His parents had remarried and divorced twice. His mother eventually got remarried and moved to the family to Texas. So I did mention that he goes by 2 different nicknames. And we are going to talk about both of them, but let's start with the first one, which is the Candyman. Now, he earned that nickname because when his family moved back to Texas, they opened up a candy company. Dean Corll eventually made his way to become the vice president of the candy company, and he earned a reputation of being really kind to the local children, particularly the teenage boys. Like, he put a pool table in the back of his factory so that the local kids could hang out. And he was known to give out lots of free candy. So they called Dean Corll the Candyman. He did make a couple of inappropriate advances to some of the younger staff at his company, but if they complained, he would just fire them. Then in 1967, Dean Corll met someone who is incredibly important to this story because they alter the course of each other's lives forever. In 1967, Dean Corll met David Owen Brooks, who was only 12 years old at the time. David was only in 6th grade when they met, and he was in a vulnerable position to be taken advantage of. His parents were divorced, he didn't have a lot of money, and he got made fun of all the time for the way he looked and because he wore glasses. But he started to hang out at the pool table behind Dean Corll's factory. Dean Corll gave him free candy. He gave him money if he needed it. And David said that Dean Corll was one of the first adults he had met who didn't make fun of the way he looked. And he came to view Dean Corll as a father figure in his life. He didn't know he made friends with a psychopath, though, because this is what Dean Corll was doing. Because Dean Corll exploited his trust and convinced him to let him essay him in exchange for money. Which totally mind-fucked him, because he eventually dropped out of high school and came to regard Dean Corll's apartment as his second home. And he unfortunately always felt a deep sense of loyalty to Dean Corll, which is so sad because he is one of those special kind of monsters that turns their victims into victimizers.
It was Christmas Eve, and 11-year-old Juliet was decorating the tree. It was getting late, and her mother called her and said she would be home from work a bit late tonight. Juliet said okay and continued decorating the tree until she was finished. She relaxed for a bit and stared out of the 6th-floor apartment window at the skyline of the city when suddenly she began to hear scratching at her front door. She then went up to the door and listened and looked through the peephole and saw a man dressed as Santa. Nervous, Juliet asked, "Who's there?" "It's Santa Claus. Let me in. I'm cold and hungry," said the man. She knew this wasn't Santa and said, "My mom's not home. Can you please leave?" Juliet watched through the peephole as the man's face turned angry and he began banging the door and twisting the doorknob. He then screamed, "It's Santa, Juliet. Give me my damn milk and cookies." Juliet's stomach dropped. She was terrified now. How did he know her name? She then threatened to call the cops, and the man finally stopped and walked down the hallway. Suddenly, the man came running back down the hallway with an axe in his hand and began striking the door with it until it broke. Juliet ran and hid in a closet. The man entered the apartment and began saying, "Juliet, my pretty, where are you?" He then opened a closet door, and suddenly Juliet jumped at him and stabbed him in the eye with his coat hanger. The man screamed and yanked it from his eye and grabbed Juliet and held her on the ground. He then whispered in her ear, "You can scream and beg for your life, but naughty girls get the axe and nice girls get the knife." Juliet's mother returned home a little after midnight and saw her door hacked to pieces. She ran inside to make sure her daughter was okay. She looked around and began screaming in horror. The Christmas tree was decorated with Juliet's organs, and her head was perched at the top like a star.
An innocent sleepover would turn into a murder investigation. This terrifying case proves that you really have no idea what's round the corner. It was a cold winter's night in December 1998 in Hopewell, Missouri. So 15-year-old Josh Sansouchi, he was going for a typical sleepover at his friend Michael Politti's house. Michael lived at his house with his mum Rita. The pair had plans to play some chess together and play some video games. However, being typical teenage boys, they got bored quickly and wanted something more entertaining to do. They knew that nearby there were some railway tracks. They actually frequently went there to set fires. Now, it sounds dangerous, but this is the kind of thing I feel that normal teenage boys kind of do. They did this for a little bit and then they headed back to Michael's house. Now that night, Michael's mum, 40-year-old Rita, had been working at a nearby bar. She came home from work just after the boys got back and everyone just kind of went to bed. Just before 6:30 a.m, however, the boys woke up startled. The bedroom that they were in was covered in thick smoke. Now Michael had been sleeping on his bed and Josh had just spent the night on the floor. So having woke to a room filled with smoke, the boys obviously panicked and they started crawling to the front door of the house. Now Michael realised his mum's obviously in the house too, so he shouted for his mum, but he got no reply. The boys then made their way into Rita's room to try and get her to get out of the house, but they saw something horrific. She was covered in blood and she was on fire from the waist up. The boys said that they completely panicked. Rita had been bludgeoned to death. The children obviously fled the house and police showed up and brought them in for questioning. The two boys maintained that they'd been asleep the entire time until the smoke woke them up. However, officers decided to quickly arrest 14-year-old Michael for his mum's murder. They said that they mainly did this based on two factors. One, how little emotion he showed, and obviously we all know that could have been shock. And two, because he failed a voice stress test, which I'd never heard of, but I presume it's something very similar to like a lie detector test. Now those are obviously very controversial, and I've actually seen cases where a murderer has passed a lie detector and an innocent party has failed one. What police seemed to fail to look into was potential other suspects and the horrific DV history between Michael's mum Rita and his dad Ed, who wasn't living with them. Ed had cheated on Rita numerous times and they were apparently both quite violent with each other. On one occasion, police had to be called when the dad pushed Rita to the ground and was choking her on the floor. Rita had ended up divorcing Ed, which he was livid about. Ed had even tried to bribe his son Michael with money to come and live with him instead of his mum. Michael actually really liked living with his mum. He declined the offer, he declined the money, and he said he just wanted to live him and his mum. Interestingly, at the time of the murder, Rita and Ed's divorce had been finalised for less than a week. Despite all of this obviously illustrating a potential other suspect, Michael was charged with the murder and taken to trial. A jury found him guilty and he was given life in prison. The Innocence Project agreed to take on his case and they agreed that the evidence he was convicted on wasn't really evidence at all. At his trial, it was claimed that a solvent was found in Michael's shoes, which was like petrol. However, it was later found that yes, solvents were used, but they were used in the manufacturing of the shoe itself. And this was similar to petrol, but it didn't prove that there was petrol on Michael's shoes. In 2021, Michael got a lifeline. A bill was passed in Missouri that basically gave young offenders a second chance. Michael was granted parole and he was finally out of prison, but he was desperate for his conviction to be wiped from his record. He obviously felt that he was still labelled as his mum's murderer, which he said he wasn't. He's still fighting to prove his innocence, and Michael's siblings state that their dad has a funny way of showing that he loves them. In an interview, they reported that his interest in their lives had been on and off, and they go through stages of not speaking.